Hi, folks. It's time for my yearly re-record. I'm going to try to do this a little bit more often because my supporters deserve to be thanked, and I want to keep things more up to date going forward. First off, thank you for returning to the Whiskey Ring. If this is your first time here, or if you're a frequent listener, please take the moment to like and subscribe, rate and review wherever you found the podcast. If you have suggestions for how to make the podcast better, or guests or topics you'd like to hear, please reach out to me at david@whiskymyweddingring.com or via Facebook or Instagram. Second, I want to thank my vintage level sponsors, those at the highest level who keep this podcast going. Truly, without these supporters, I would have had to stop doing this a long time ago. Thank you specifically to Don, to John and Jim, Bill and Connor, Steve, Jake and Bill, Trevor, Michael and Jesse, Jared, Brendan and Larry, Logan, Patrick and Andrew, Dustin, Wade and Gavin, Daniel, and Justin. Thank you all for supporting, listening, telling your friends about this podcast. Cannot stress enough how much you all make this possible to go forward. If you haven't yet joined the Patreon, please consider doing so at patreon.com/whiskeyinmyweddingring. You can support for as little as $5 a month, where you can have access to ad-free episodes, and will also have priority if a vintage spot becomes available. Those spots are strictly limited, so if a spot becomes available, you're going to want to be the first to know. Lastly, going forward, I am trying to be better about posting show notes for each episode on my website, whiskyinmyweddingring.com. These show notes will have links to websites and socials for my guests, and will also have additional information not in the interview, including reviews and tasting notes whenever possible or relevant. Thank you everyone for listening, and I hope to have you back as a listener next week. Hey folks, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. Today I'm very excited. I'm talking not to a distiller, but to a blending house. Relatively new blending house, but one that's already, in my mind, showcasing incredible skill, putting out some amazing whiskeys and other spirits that we'll mention. Talking today about Woven Whisky. And to talk about Woven, we've got Nick Ravenhall and Pete Allison, two of the founders of Woven. And guys, gents, welcome on.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So as I was telling the guys just before we hit the record button, I'm not going to do a traditional origin story question today, just because I got a ton of questions and I'll kind of weave it throughout. But Woven is, like I said, it's a newer blending house established in 2020, first started in 2021. That really is, in many ways, I think, redefining what blending is looking like in the UK, in Scotland, and for world whiskies in particular. So my starting question is in interviews, you guys have, in addition to your fellow founder, Duncan McRae, as well as some of your staff, have talked about the numerous inspirations that go into Woven Whisky. And just to list off a few of them, we're talking Compass Box, techniques from Japan and cognac, the Scotch Malt Whisky Society vaults near the Whiskey District in Leith, the history of blending and rectifying in the city, Dave Broom on the sense of place and sneaking Johnny Walker Black into a single malt tasting, and even non-whiskey themes from coffee, art, and fashion. Now, these are a lot of inspirations, and I could see kind of there's a through line for sure in them. But when you were creating Woven, did you immediately think of all these inspirations at once, or did you kind of realize that they were all coming together over the time?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
But I've got a little bit I can lead with Pete, and then shall we riff a little bit? Because I think the important thing to say is Dunk, Pete, and I are all very different people, right? Like we've got the thing that we share. We share a passion for sharing a dram. We share a passion for blending. We are very passionate about that whiskey making technique, bringing things together. But as humans, we live in different places. We lead very different lives, and we've got different backgrounds and upbringings and cultural influences, and they all flow through Woven. And I think that means that when you start looking under the hood of what we do, you see the many layers of our friendship integrating into our whiskey making, right? Our interests, our passions, our ideas, our thoughts. So, it doesn't quite answer your question, but I thought I'd buy our whiskey maker at least. What have I got you 60 seconds to think about that, Pete?
I think you've just given me more to think about. But I mean, what you say is exactly right, and I think that was probably the starting point for us. Is when we were building the idea of Woven, it was about it was about bringing in different strands of us into one company, and that's kind of translated into how we look at sort of the the ways in which we make our story, but also how we kind of build our brand and our community a lot. So to go into sort of what I know a lot about, which is kind of the how we make it, and sort of what was the reasons and the methods behind that. You know, Duncan, Nick, and I, we're not trained whiskey makers. We've come into the industry via the bar industry, where we learned how to balance drinks. But outside of that, it's been pretty much a steep learning curve into how we actually make it. And for us, it was a lot about what can we borrow from not just traditional Scotch and traditional whiskey making, but also outside of it. So deep diving into how coffee's made and how blending coffee works. There's a lot of just shared language and shared techniques that we've definitely borrowed from, and going on into things like cognac and champagne are really good. The sensory from perfume is incredible, and there's some amazing books that you're able to kind of get into to understand sort of what's going on at sort of different levels of a factory, which is really interesting. And that's kind of been sort of the mindset into how we take our making into whiskey, is to have that very open mindset and be as inclusive as possible with kind of everything that we do, and say, well, that's really cool what they're doing in cognac, right? We recently adopted a process called Bonafactor, or sort of a little bit of a riff on it, in that we're collecting these kind of weird, funky, amazing whiskies that are generally sort of too over the top to be able to put into a blend as a large component, but by combining them and creating a vatting of them, and then maturing those in an ex sherry butt, you're able to kind of condense these flavors really well, and then use it in small amounts to be able to add a lot of depth into your whiskey. But yeah, I mean, it's about that sort of that approach of, we don't have the heritage and the knowledge that's been passed down through generations or been taught. So being able to learn it ourselves has I think given us a bit of a superpower, in that we've been able to almost forge our own path into making whiskey, which is very liberating and also very enjoyable.
I like it. And the name Woven itself, you said, come from experience. Those moments when you weren't getting too deep in the weeds. It was the being with the people, finding out the why, the social experience. Similarly, you've said how you guys do tasting notes. I don't want to say you don't. So there is an expectation out of what the whiskey should taste like, but you're also like, it doesn't take into account who you're drinking it with, how you're enjoying it, which should always be something you're thinking about. So in addition to the inspirations and where you guys are coming from, and we'll mention the bartending and hospitality background as well. When you guys were starting, you also briefly looked at the new distilling scene and pretty quickly decided it was saturated. Switching to blending as a plan instead. For how long did you really consider the distillery route before going, no, we're going to do blending instead?
I'm impressed with your research.
Yeah, that research is top drawer. I mean, blending was the thing really from the start. There were other things that we looked at, but on the distilling side of things, Pete, I'm not going to try and throw you under the bus here, but you remember our first plans on that business plan on the spreadsheet, where we were speccing out the price of a distillery, and there was a cost implication, and we went backwards and forwards for a wee bit on what we felt most passionate about, and blending is the thing.
I mean, we did have
And
in the spreadsheet, it was wildly optimistic, but no, it was very. I mean, I think that the conversation around distilling was pretty short lived. In that, I think what we felt very comfortable with as a trio was that we want to. The ambition for us is that there's this long story of whiskey, not just in Scotland but around the world. And we want to be able to add to it, right? And for us, the vessel to be able to do that, it became very quickly apparent that was going to be around blending. We're able to augment and change and create new flavors through blending whiskey. And that was kind of immediately what got us really excited.
Along that same line, we'll get a little more into the blending of world whiskey shortly. I wanted to ask this up front. Is in 2024, Whiskey Advocate did a feature on you guys, and they brought more attention to you, certainly on this side of the Atlantic. And in that interview, you guys as a group said that, blending across borders has been really important for you as a business, but that you didn't immediately set out to do that. And it was kind of about circumstances and being able to acquire some world whiskeys for not much money that kind of drove you that path. How soon into the business did you realize that blending across borders would be a central pillar, albeit one you hadn't anticipated?
There's a couple of layers answers to that question, right? So when we set off on the journey, out of the three of us, it was pretty clear that Pete was going to be the whiskey maker. Like Dunk and I have our skill sets. Mine sits on the commercial businessy side of things, and Dunk's great on the brand stuff, and Pete, ever since literally the first time I met him way back in, I want to say, what was that, 2014, back then, was talking about wanting to blend. And one of the things we discussed at length, we're like, well, we don't have a whiskey maker, and then we're like, well, actually, let's just do this ourselves. There was a period of time that we gave ourselves working within Scotch, learning our crafts, Pete putting together recipes and then putting them out there, and then us nervously waiting to see what friends and colleagues across the industry would judge our collective homework. So staying in Scotch in those early years was partly about that. Like, we used to talk about getting our blue ticks, earning our street cred, getting our mindset, our making way, our way of making and thinking, at least, something that we felt that we had a handle on. And that piece of when we graduated into world whiskey, I think it kind of happened a bit naturally. Friends around the world saw that we're blending, and mates that we've got in other countries are saying, "Oh, we'd love you to have a look at some samples," and samples would come into the room, and it just had this very organic feel to it. There's no, I don't remember there being. We'd always talked about it, that there wasn't a master moment of like, now's the time to do this.
No, we'd had conversations with some amazing I think one of the really cool things about being an independent blender is that you're kind of able to have these very open conversations with any distillery. And our natural network, having worked in sort of whiskey for quite a number of years, is that we do have friends in far-flung places who have been brave enough and crazy enough and amazing enough to build their own spaces and really make some really cool stuff. So we were getting sent some samples of whiskey that were really interesting and exciting, and we didn't necessarily have the specific lens of let's go and blend with these. But as I'm trying to sort of pinpoint when we actually made that decision, but we were able to pull together some really great whiskies from various different parts of the world and start to bring them onto the table and introduce them into sort of the natural cadence of how we were making. And it was, for me, there was definitely a moment that I remember, and it was like, if you think about Scotch, there's 152 distilleries, or however many there are now, many, and looking at them as flavor or colors on a palette, it's like looking at an IMAX cinema. It's amazing. It's got full immersion, incredible. But then when you look when you take into account distilleries around the world that are using their own techniques, their philosophies, their ingredients, their ways of doing it that are different and challenges Scotland. It's like putting on 3D glasses. You suddenly get this brand new experience by being able to introduce these flavors, and that was what was, you know, almost kind of jaw dropping. Was going, right, this distillery from New Zealand that uses manuka wood that I hadn't even heard of suddenly introduces this crazy sort of orange oil, clove oil, coconut oil, wood smoke, barbecue, meaty note to a whiskey, and you go, well, that doesn't happen at all over here. Never come across that. Now, how can we use it? But yeah, it's incredible. It's an amazing sort of freedom to be able to do it, and I think that's just really cool.
It's a good point to give a double shout out to two partners of yours who made the introduction that brought us here today. Martin over at Fetty Ocean, as well as Matt of Thompson down in New Zealand. So one more question for you guys with the comparing where you were at the beginning to now in particular, but a challenge you guys have spoken about at the outset was that distilleries were being more selective about who they sold casks to, whether independent bottlers or blenders. And it was something that you attributed to, in particular, these distilleries being burned by cask investment schemes a little too often. Now, 6-7 years in now, do you still see hesitation, the same kind of hesitation on the part of producers that you want to work with? Or is your kind of reputation and proof of concept get them past that worry?
I think that today we see quite few barriers when we're speaking to potential producers. You know, like Nick was saying, we had to work pretty hard at the beginning to earn our stripes. Being a sort of an unknown entity meant that there was a very natural and understandable skepticism towards allowing, you know, whiskies that genuinely generations of people have worked on really hard to make and create beautiful things that in their own right are special. You know, saying yes to allowing three guys to do whatever it is they're going to do with it was like, I think that the interview that you're referring to is relatively early, and I don't know if I would necessarily sort of stick by that. But there was a hesitancy from a lot of people, understandably. And I think that today, what's really nice is that we have built up enough momentum within our circles of people who are able to supply whiskey and distilleries for many of them to be able to, if they don't know us, be able to find out about us, or if they do know us, be able to have that quite natural conversation. And we get approached nowadays by a lot more distilleries as well that are asking to be part of our blends as well, which is really nice. I mean, it's been a progressive shift into people coming to us, and it's not everybody. I'm not saying that we are being, you know, we're getting phone calls every day or whatever, but it is nice when a distillery that we've fanboyed over for 6 years, you know, you see in an inbox saying, I mean, I'm thinking it's a few occasions, but, you know, we've gone, wow, didn't think we'd ever have access to this and be able to you know, get a cask sample or be able to have that conversation on kind of how they can fit or what the pricing is or whatever it is, and that's incredible to be able to have that network that's kind of opening up more and more, and I see it as a real sort of privilege to have those conversations as a bit more of a serious entity than, you know, we were when we first started, which was, right, what does this acronym mean, and how do we cost it, and what's all this? So yeah, I mean, it's been the learning curve of a lifetime, but incredible, really enjoyable.
The supply chain have changed massively as well over the course of our business. So if you think back 5 years ago when we started, there was still single malt boom was on the up. We had COVID causing all kinds of issues with global supply, and some malts that we were working with that you'd call Diageo workhorse malt, we can get at a price that would make our end price point on the shelf position us correctly in front of the customer. Whereas, you know, it's written a lot now and talked a lot about the great whiskey locks, which are all over the world. That's somewhat changed, and those kind of supply price barriers to entry for us have also changed. Those commercial conversations have changed. And so also our experience on knowing what we need to buy, how much we need to buy, Pete, beyond the brilliant work he does on sensory and putting the liquids together, is also how, we've got a blender who also translates the liquid and flavor into what needs to happen from a COGS perspective, right? Like let's be a little bit real. Price is really, really, really important now, not just because of cost of living, but also, I think we're in a world now where people who enjoy and love whiskey have got such a great understanding of what quality is and a really strong understanding of what fair value is on the shelf. So, that's also changed for us as whiskey makers, being able to have those conversations with the right people so that we can structure our blends in the right ways. Yeah, there's been a big shift in the industry and a shift in our knowledge as well.
For sure. And it feels like as good a place as any to note. So Nick, Pete, you and your team were kind enough to share 5 bottles, actually, now that I think about it. 4 products with us. So we got the Woven Hemispheres, Woven Homemade, the Woven Pure Malt, and then the Woven Coffee blend, which I wasn't expecting at all. It wasn't even on my radar, to be honest, because I'm not always looking for those. And I was telling the guys before that I think of the 4, Homemade, it seems to be my favorite for the moment. It's the second product inspired by Bailey Nicole Jarvis that has been just a bright spot when I taste it. So I must have to try the original at some point, but we'll see if I can find any.
Hard to get nowadays.
Yeah. Case in point, I think I first heard about it in a talk with Aaron Goldfarb talking about Dusty Booze. So already we're stretching to find it, but who knows? Who knows? It's on my list. It's right up there with like the Michter's 25 Rye. No, I know I'm not going to get to taste it, but it's there somewhere. Anyway,
anybody listening has a nip, send it to David.
Those are about $1,000 an ounce, so I don't know about that. Anybody
generous that has a nip, send it to David.
For sure. With these products, I mean, it's noticeable when you look at your website. None of these everything is under 100 pounds. These are not whiskeys that are meant to be, collector's items or just sit on a shelf. They're meant to be drunk and enjoyed and shared. And that's while keeping in mind the immense logistics that must go into getting malt whiskey from New Zealand, getting it from 6 partners around the world for Super Blend, for Friends of the North, for Nordic countries. There's a lot of costs that go into this. So I don't take it for granted that you still have an extremely approachable price point. And even for those in the US where I know there's not really distribution yet, but it's easy enough to buy most of these through either Whiskey Exchange, Master of Malt, these websites that do ship here. So, you're getting what I feel is a really quality product for near or the same prices as you are for, the high quality blends that you would expect to pay £100 for, £150 for. Honestly, I don't mind saying this and you've already sent the product, so I'm really not schmoozing you on this, is that I know Compass Box was a big inspiration. And I think you guys have kind of been able to undercut, if I can say, some of the pricing that they've been able to have for recent releases with really great quality blends. So that was just me pontificating.
Yeah, I think this is where, I'll quite happily step back a little bit on this one, because this is Nick's ability to understand kind of how whiskey is being drunk around the world and what people are looking for. And we have pretty robust and sometimes a little bit animated conversations about whether we can't do a thing, but I'll let Nick talk about it, because I think that it's that thing that you're talking about is something that we focus on a lot in terms of our commercial strategy.
Yeah, and just there's a couple of things there. I think first and foremost that piece with Compass Box, quite often we find ourselves sharing beers and drams with the crew at the end of a whiskey show, right? Because when you look across the room of new world whiskey makers and esteemed houses of whiskey makers from Scotland, we're the blend kids, and it's quite often it's just us, and we'll go, hey, you want to go grab a pizza and a beer and sit down and have a chat. And there's great respect for what John built. We keep reflecting on the fact that, you know, John was decades ahead of us and when he set up Compass Box, and, you know, as hard as that fight has been to talk about blend and why blend is relevant, why blend is important, why it's a great whiskey making technique, we still get caught in those category conversations of single malt versus blend. So it's always really nice to unwind with the Compass Box crew and just be blenders and geek out on what we've got in the shed and what's coming next. Equally, it's always really funny when we do catch up and we share, you know, what's on the radar. And coming back to what you were saying about Ballynick and Jarvie, you know, a couple of years before we launched Homemade, and I ran into a couple of the crew and I was like, oh, what are you guys up to? And they're like, oh, we're just about to launch a tribute blend to B&J. And I was like, what? So are we. And we started chatting about it, and I was like, what's your price point? And, you know, it was north of 150. It was part of their you know, their Metropolis blends, going back and finding these lost recipes and getting these incredible ingredients and stuff that A, we could afford, right? Like, and B, you know, we could source it, but couldn't pay for it. So it doesn't come into our inventory. But still, what I love about that is, like, two businesses looking at the same thing with two different whiskey making mindsets and producing two different price points, but still, I'd argue very strong quality to the customer. Right. And so then the point he chooses, which is what we discuss a lot and is quite important to us, is how accessible do we want to make this? We're a very little company. We're 5 people, and we are very reliant on someone who is not us selling our whiskies for us at some point. And that bottle needs to be sold 3 to 4 times, right? Into the importer, into the wholesaler, to the retailer, and then to the customer. And so we see price as an important part of that equation. And if we can make it accessible enough and we can offset that price by overstating the quality, then we're making everyone in that chain really, really happy, because ultimately then that becomes something that should be easier to sell, right? Because there is that business bit underneath it. You know, I think that accessibility piece on our core range, you will taste it through and you'll see that it's designed to ladder up. It's designed to bring people in and into, you know, what's this weird soap bottle with this non-traditional name and blending whiskeys from all around the world. That requires a little bit of a bet from the customer at the shelf to come and try that. But we don't want to make that bet too heavy. Equally, coming back to things like Friends of the North, for us, it's really important that when we are working with ingredients from small producers from around the world, that we're paying them on the commercial side everything they need to have to make that transaction value add. You know, I don't think we negotiate particularly hard with our New World partners when we say, tell us how much it's worth. And we try to work it out. And equally, we try and do that on the other side. You know, when someone is picking up a bottle of Friends in the North, you know, it's not at £150. That's a massive bet for a customer to make. Whereas if we keep it under 100 and you get to taste a bit of, you know, Kira from Finland and Fedi from Norway, and then High Coast and Agatato from Sweden, and then plus our whiskey making mindset and what Pete does as a whiskey maker, I think you start to add up the fair value in favor of the customer, if that makes sense. So that's what we're always trying to balance out.
I think that's a good transition into the blending philosophy. So, Nick, as you said, Pete he's the whiskey maker. He's the chief blender. I know it's not the official title, but
I'll
chief
take
blender.
it.
And it's like, so as I said, all of the founders came to Woven through bartending and hospitality, with the idea that even though no one at the time, including Pete, as you've said, none of you had official blending experience. You had worked on bar programs for sure to create really world-class cocktails, and had done some work in labs and for companies as brand ambassadors in certain cases, but not, as I said, not official blending experience, if you will. One of the more recent interviews that you guys did was in Barley Magazine, and it was one of my favorites because it had a picture of your notes for a blend. So it was the visualization of the grid system that you had plus the notes on top of it. And Nick, you said Pete's been thinking about how to blend since you met him in 2014, 2015. Pete, this grid system that you use and the building up from the grain and malts up to a finished product, how did that process develop for you?
Good question. That is a good question. So I don't know. I don't think I know another way how to do it. Is probably the very honest answer. It made the most logical sense. I think that there's a mysticism to blending whiskey that you do it through, I don't know, a savant. You just know exactly how this will go with that and that percentage, and if you reduce it with water and then you add this in, then it will do X, Y, or Z inbuilt. So the response to that, I mean, logic would say, well, they are flavor blocks, and if you start to bring them together in a relatively structured way, then you're able to do some elimination of combinations that don't work. You're able to highlight the ones that do work. So that was really essentially it. And then it's just building out that system, turn it into what can be relatively refined. And then at the same time, over the last 6 years, it's been about sort of learning these whiskies. As today there is I'd say there's 20% intuition and 80% logic. Yeah, we've got some interesting ones on the table just now, which are curveballs, different grains, different textures, and things you just don't have a clue how they would work at all. So you have to really go back to square one and go, okay, grid, do your thing.
I like it. I like the challenge. And in that, in that same interview, you guys were talking about how you get concepts before the blends and from like a shared Google document.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're comfortable saying. If you got to keep it under wraps, let me know. But what does a concept look like when it's on the sheet versus when it comes to fruition? Yeah.
So I mean, just to rewind it slightly. When we were building out Woven as a concept, literally speaking, Duncan, Nick, myself, and kind of figuring out what this could be, together with our brand design partners, Freitag Anderson, who are based in Scotland. The idea was to, instead of calling our whiskies expressions or sort of name them as something, we decided that we wanted to call them experiences and be able to develop these experiences from us and end with us, to then be able to translate it into something that you can drink. And what I think that sounds a little bit superficial, in that if you clawed it back, you'd go, what the hell is Pete talking about? So the easiest way to sort of talk about it is that we had a document that was open that was sort of, I like, the feeling of being lost in the woods next to the sea, and being able to get that sensory of, resin and sea salt and minerality kind of in one, and that feeling. So okay, that's a good feeling. That's a good concept. We like that. Or, the feeling of, and then what that does, if we kind of bring it back to a bit of the grid system, is that you're then, once you kind of build up a sort of a sketch of a whiskey, you're then able to augment it a little bit and take it in a direction, and through that direction, you're then able to kind of lock it into something, a feeling, an emotion, a thought, a memory, a philosophy even, and that can guide you the last leg of the journey of making it. And I suppose kind of where that whiskey ends in terms of us bottling it, we name it as that experience, for then the consumer to be able to have their experience drinking it. And we really liked that sort of that journey that we go through, the stop, and then their experience of having it. Because, if you have a whiskey that's called modern nostalgia, but if you have it when you're around lots of friends after some amazing food, one of the best nights of your life, just because it feels comfortable and all this type of thing, that can be an incredible experience, and you can feel that. If you have it, after a breakup and, with the rain on the windows and you're feeling all alone, that can be your thing as well. But that kind of that nostalgia or happiness or synchronicity or awe or joy in nature or whatever it's called can speak to you, because that was our truest point for where it ended in the making process. And so, yeah, it was really great. And we still do these experiences, which are really powerful when we make them, because there's something really real within it.
David, we still have folk coming up, because this was during our early years, right, where we were doing our collections and doing more experiences to collection. I'll still have folk come up and say, "Oh man, Peachy, have you got any left anywhere? I want it." The other day I was out with some friends over lunch I hadn't seen a couple for a very long time, and I brought out my very last bottle of Experience number 2, and that was our happy whiskey. And again, one of the boys, Craig Harper, at the table, he's like, "Oh man, I've got 2 of those bottles left at home, and they make me happy. They make me happy." It's quite cool seeing that play out in real life, because these are some of the formative kind of philosophies that we shared at the start. And then when you see people play them back to you, you see them having that like really happy feeling around that they've connected with the thinking and the feeling that goes into the whiskey making. Yeah, I don't know. It's a bit jaw dropping when that happens sometimes.
I think just adding on to that, and just riffing slightly, because it has been, we've not really talked about this, to be honest with you. But what's been really interesting is sort of the effect of time. Like when we made these things, it felt very immediate, and like you sort of go, here's this product, we've kind of ended it by calling it happiness and then putting it out into the world. And 5 years later, having people say, that one was the one that it's that really interesting sort of shift of time that kind of plays very strangely, because it contracts and extends kind of your understanding of what you've done in the past and what you're doing now as well. Whereas in the moment, it feels very sort of immediate.
We were hustling pretty hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know the first 4 expressions, I think, were a total of around 1,000 bottles. Not a lot was available, but I mean, you said it wasn't for the purpose of making an LTO. It was, you had so much stock available, and that's what you had.
And remember, David, it also seemed crazy to us that 1,000 people, we don't know 1,000 people, we're going to spend their money that they've earned working on something that we'd made. That was a strange notion in itself.
I mean, that's a question I was thinking of too, was because you guys are coming in with, call it industry or industry adjacent experience, was there a built-in audience that you had, let's say, in that first business proposal when you're first starting out, and has it changed over the years?
Question. Wish Dunk was here.
Yeah, no, you're good at this. You know the answers to these ones.
It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed because I don't. Those traditional kind of spirits marketing ideas around demography, that's never been part of our mindset. We've always set out to, challenge the way that whiskey can be perceived and enjoyed. And by challenge, I'm not saying that we're reinventing whiskey per se, but just putting it out there in a different way. right? Talking about the connection, talking about the experience, talking about the feeling. That is a very woven mindset, which is part of who we are. And we're out there seeking others who are open enough to connect in that way. And that lands, right? Like, I had a tasting. It was a head-to-head tasting with Rob from Cotswolds Distillery. Shout out to Ryan Chetty and the crew, who we hired their studio basement off them. And, there was folk, very diverse audience, folk from everywhere. But the one thing everyone shared was this value of openness, curiosity, high quality, wanting to share and chatting and connecting. So that hasn't changed for us in any way, shape, or form. We might call it the next generation of whiskey drinkers. And I think that's the thing which is changing, is that the openness to trial. That is something which is real for us.
I think that we have quite a shared sort of commonality between us that's like, we really love like interesting things, right? That kind of appeal to us. It doesn't necessarily need to be a brand new thing that is, happening, but something that's like, we kind of have a feel for what we think is cool and interesting and exciting, or just going to be packed full of flavor, but perhaps has been a bit overlooked, or something like that. And I think that we've kind of wanted to build a brand around that sort of commonality of here's what we think, dude. I think what's really great about Woven, if I can speak just very openly, is that I love standing behind a stand at a whiskey show with Woven, right? Like, there aren't many brands actually in the world that I would just say, hell for leather, yeah, this is absolutely something that I believe in and love, and that sort of thing, because it's hard to, but Woven is kind of exactly that. And it's because what we're doing is creating a brand and liquid and story and positioning and all the things sort of that can be building a business that we're really proud of. And I think we're doing it in the right manner. And so kind of knowing that kind of puts us into the sector of these other brands that we really admire. We feel like we can be part of it. Yeah. If that answers anything.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. And I think I'll ask the next question. I think that's a good way to go into it, which is this idea that as blenders and as people who really value the partners that you're working with, particularly those who are smaller, newer to the scene, maybe lesser known, you've both articulated that people's first question with a blend is usually, okay, where does it come from? Like, what are the components? And you want to, maximize transparency where you can. There are distilleries that don't want to share their name necessarily. There's also naming rights that cost money, so not always possible. But you also want people to focus on the sum, on the end product, not necessarily the parts. I think in the blends that I've tried, whether it's two components like the hemispheres, or more than two in the Pastor's New or Super Blend, I never get the sense that I'm tasting like Thompson and North British. I get the sense I'm tasting hemispheres. Now, taking that to kind of the next logical step, when you have blends like Pastor's New, that's the world's first 100% English whiskey blend, Friends of the North, High Coast, Gura, Fedi, and Agitato Super Blend from six countries. Each of these focuses on a region, a country, or an idea that in my mind necessitates to a certain extent knowing where those components are from. So just Friends of the North, I think, is the easiest one to do an example of, which is, I look at that bottle and I want to taste the sum of it put together, but I'm also really curious about each of the pieces that are inside it. So when you have a blend that has a specific purpose, a specific focus like that, do you feel kind of a tension between knowing the parts or focusing on the parts versus focusing on the sum?
Before Pete answers with the whiskey making side of things, I think there's something really important to to reflect on, in that the word blends have lost trust over generations, right? Like if you think, none of us are around then, but I've heard the stories around Leith where if you think about those old Leith whiskey makers and the bottles that were on the optic in a pub, which were just getting served and served fast and served in volume, those whiskies had to be very, very, very high quality. And that was what you stood, you looked at VAT 69, you're like, that's my dram, that's my granddad's dram, this is what we drink around here. And then because the erosion of price and change of route to market, grocery, all over time, the quality is gone, and the trust has been broken because you've had a rise of single malt saying, here is something better, right? And here's something which is worth more. And here's something which is high quality. So we've done a really good job in Scotch in turning blend into a product, right? It's really quite price driven. I think that all flows into what we're doing with things like Pastures New and things like Friends in the North, where, yes, we're looking at regions, but we're also looking at regions which produce flavor that we can't make in Scotland. And so then it becomes really exciting to bring those flavors together and present them to what is a single malt audience, really, right? Like people who know whiskey, or could be a bourbon, could be rye audience, but let's just say an educated whiskey audience. And so by doing those expressions outside of Scotch, because for Scotch it's too easy for it to be overlooked. Just like, okay, well, you've just blended some old Speyside in there, and that's why this is good. There's some old grain in there. That can be quite dismissed again, because it still goes into that sub narrative of you're a blender, and that's a cheap category and cheap way of making whiskey. When we do whiskey this way, we are bringing excitement, new flavor, and we're stepping out of the perception of cheapness. And so having that story where we're like, the reason you love this and getting excited by these flavors is because they're from these places, and these whiskey makers do this, this, and this, and this. And Pete brings these whiskeys together so that you get a beautiful, what did you say? That you're talking about the 3D glasses, right? Like you are now looking at whiskey world in a new way. That then allows us to make our house blend. Right. So, we build up that trust so that when we do put something out there at a more accessible price point, we're not really there to tell you for house blend the whiskies are from South Africa and Canada and Ireland. And, that's not we're there here to say, here's a really great whiskey, drink it. We used to call that general purpose whiskey. That was our working title for that whiskey for years. We didn't know how to make it. It was always a North Star for us to get to that place where you could just put a bottle out there. So I think that's the full answer, right? Is, people break it down as a blend versus single malt battle, but I think they overlook the fact that blend over multiple generations has done a disservice to the whiskey making technique that it is. And so doing some expressions where we go full whiskey geek, full noise whiskey geek, totally unadulterated, allows us to buy back some of that trust.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that is exactly right. There's an interesting sort of piece that you're both sort of touching on, which is who we're talking to at any one time. Like David, we want people to have a bottle of Woven and not necessarily say, right, what are that's using 36% of this distillery. We want it. My ambition is that you drink one whiskey and not 5 whiskeys layered on top of each other. That's not that something needs to be balanced and harmonious and together as being one thing. And that's what we want people to experience. But at the same time, we absolutely know that quite a few of our audience want to know what's in it and why. And that why is really important as well. And it's important to them. If we're using 36% Cura in Friends in the North, I can't remember the exact percentage, by the way, so don't quote me on that. But if we're using that, why is that? Well, it's because they've smoked their rye that is grown in a harsh environment, so it grows smaller and more hardy, so you get more of a bready flavor coming out of it, but then they smoke it using alder wood that they use to make their saunas out of. So you get this kind of really fresh wood smoke coming into it, and then they're putting the solids through their distillation that gives it again more of this robust caramelization sort of flavor coming through into it. And what that does to the blend is it creates sort of this central node from which the other whiskies can hang off of it. Now that's really interesting to some people. Not saying to everybody, but it's interesting to some people, and it was interesting to me when making it that would happen. And we want to be able to give that when asked, but it doesn't necessarily. But what we want people to do is to pick up a thing going, Friends in the North. That's an interesting name. It's an interesting bottle. The story is that they went around to the Nordic distilleries to go and find some really cool whiskey to bring together into a blend. And this is the result. It's really tasty. So there's definitely these levels of conversation that we're really comfortable having, right? But it's definitely, the result, the ambition for me is that what you're having is something that's really yummy at the end of the day in a glass, and you want to share it with friends and go, wow, that's cool.
Yummy is you said something else, the North Star. That is your North Star, is yummy. It's got to be yummy. Yeah. So keeping with actually, I'm just kidding. I was going to ask a question about the getting to the consumer, but I think you spoke to that pretty well already. So I know we're focusing a lot on the New World whiskey side of things. Just happens to be kind of where my mind is right now, with blending and with finding new distilleries to talk to. Back it was almost exactly 5 years ago. So August of 21, Pete, you and Duncan were on your first go around on Not Another Whiskey podcast. And you said that in the next 5 years, you want to blend across borders, maybe have satellite blending offices for local stories from local blend components. Clearly, the first half of that you guys have accomplished. You're making blends from New World whiskey across border from, as close as England as far as New Zealand. What about that second half, the satellite blending offices? Because I've heard that mentioned a couple times, but I also know that's kind of practicality dependent.
I'll immediately say too much if I say anything, so I'm going to let Nick do it.
We're getting there. We did when we kind of made a foray across the border and first had a distribution partner down in England. One of the first things we did was have a pop-up blending studio in Hoxton. And we ran that, which is where, that was like the very embryonic stage of where Pastures New started from and kind of came together after that. I think where we're looking now, Dunk, our friend and co-founder and director of brand, he's based in Adelaide and in Australia. In Australia, I was out there with him in Melbourne in February. We did a soft launch for Woven. It was incredible tasting at Whisky and Ailment. There was a who's who of the Aussie whiskey making scene there. It was pretty intimidating, really, right? Like there's all these super, super cool distillers that you always read about, but like they're in Tassie or Victoria, and the juice doesn't really come up here. And our mindset and our thinking was so well received, and that every time we poured Woven for an Australian whiskey fan, it just landed so well. We're sitting here talking about, okay, well, Melbourne, that needs to be the first one. We've got a distribution partner lined up. We have an order shipping eminently, right, Pete? He doesn't just blend; he also ships and packs and gets stuff out the door. And we, I think for us as whiskey makers, you can't say that you're blending across borders without actually doing something physical in place. And Australia just feels like the right place for that, right? It's as a New World whiskey making scene, with the number of distilleries they have and the wild ingredients they use and the support we get in market, then we hope to be making that play in the next year or so.
Pete, you want to add anything? I feel like you want to, but I won't make you if you don't want to.
No. No, that's exactly right. I mean, I think that it's interesting because I don't think I've listened to that podcast that we did in August 2021. So hearing you say that, I was like, what did we say? I was a bit scared when you started, but yeah, I think It's funny that we got asked what would the next 5 years look like, and now it's 5 years on, and I think that we have done way more than we ever could have dreamed of. Like, honestly, dream of. To be able to make these whiskies, be where we are. We're building an amazing facility in Leith. We're going to be going out into Australia and doing the blending rooms there. We've got distribution in some incredible countries, and we've got partners, right? Genuine partners. And one of the founding principles, I think we probably did say it in the first in that episode, was we want to build with, and they kind of guide us as to where we're going and how we're doing it. We're doing projects in some really great countries with country-specific blends as well. And so, yeah, I think that the outcomes have been far greater than sort of the dreams of what we had then, but also the journey has been, not gonna sugarcoat it. Like, it's been pretty crazy, but it's been the roller coaster that's been fun to get there. So yeah, we should really have a listen to that and see how non-grey we were.
I mean, blending world whiskeys. I mean, there's a reason that only a couple of companies, certainly that I can think of, have attempted anything of the sort. Cross-border blending. It's difficult, expensive. Certainly, I know, Nick, you've spoken to this. I'm sure, Pete, you've spoken about it too. The challenges from logistics to storage to maintaining something in bond across long distances and making sure it's all good to go from beginning to end. There's a lot of challenges there. And it's lovely to have the partners from around the world, but you also have to be able to get the whiskey across the ocean, or in the case of English distilleries, even across the border, with all the regulations and stuff that you need.
Yeah, and listen, I think part of maybe our competitive advantage within that space is two things, right? Our independence is one, right? You look at the world whiskies which are out there, and they are made by the big boys, So I think our independence allows us the creative freedom to really be serious about our craft and what we're doing. Every time we do get new samples across the desk, this Mexican parcel that we're looking at the moment, there is distilling in there which we've never seen before, and then all of a sudden we're having to, Pete's 20% intuition is now being blown out to 40%, right? Because how do you use these ingredients? We have not grown up in that place or with hands on them. So I think that means that we take the craft really serious. It's not just I happen to have some Kentucky whiskey and some Scotch and some Japanese, and I'll put it together. And that's not being disparaging against that whiskey maker. It just forces us to battle a lot harder with the ingredients that we're playing with. I think that's one bit, and I think that lands well with the customer. But the other really important piece to our world whiskey making is the fact that we're in Scotland, right? And we get access to the world's greatest resource as a blender, which is huge quantities of very well made grain, which is going into good secondary use wood, and it's right there on our doorstep, and there's tons of it, and the pricing's great. So the big thing that we need to have access to, and also the workhorse malts, which we use as well, they're in our home. So we're moving exceptional pieces of liquid in to work with some great pieces of juice that we have here.
There was, yeah, that's it. It's genuinely the greatest privilege we could. Blending whiskey is the most creative part of whiskey. Period. Stop. Like, that's it. And being able to do it and be able to open up the horizons to be able to go, yeah, here's everything in whiskey. We're not limited by anything. Is the most exciting. Like, that's the holy grail, right? To be able to say, see what you're doing, I'm going to use that. See what you're doing, I'm going to use that. And be able to create brand new things that nobody's ever tried before by combination is just incredible. But the logistics are hard, right? And that's what makes it a challenge. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. You know, I don't know if you know, but you can't make non-Scotch whiskey in Scotland by law. It's not allowed. You can't mature non-Scotch whiskey in Scotland by law. So we have to figure out ways in which to work within Scotch, EU, and local market definitions of whiskey in order to make something that fits our bill of what we're wanting to make. And with that comes, logistical challenges and compliance challenges and, things with certain, legal bodies in different countries and how to bring whiskey out or how to bring whiskey in. And yeah, I mean, but I think that's what's given us a lot of pride over the last 5 years is kind of looking at, if 5 years ago, the three of us had sat down in a room and said, right, we're going to buy a blend, we're going to put it into a bottle that says, Nick, Pete and Dunk on it, and we're going to see what we can do. I think going back to our kind of one of our core principles, which is we want to add to the story of whiskey, that doesn't add. What does is taking challenges and going, yeah, we'll give it a go and we'll figure it out. And it might take a few years to figure out, some of the whiskeys that we've looked at are really hard to bring over, and we haven't been able to yet, right? But we'll keep trying, and we'll keep going back to it and saying, right, we could do it this way, we might do it that way, or what about this way, or smuggle it through, people, or I don't know, however one does, but yeah, I mean, it's that challenge that makes it really, really cool and really exciting.
And Nick, this one's for you. Pete, I welcome your thoughts on this too. It's just in response to something that Nick had said just a couple months ago. You were on, what was it? You were on More Good Drinks, and you had an interesting take on world whiskey as a writ large. Was that countries and groups need to stop prematurely creating governing rules and constraints? And for you, where is the line between kind of protecting or creating a GI versus being too premature and being constraining?
I mean, this is something I deeply believe in the sense that I reflect a lot on when you look at the Japanese whiskey making history in the century of and beyond of what they've had in whiskey making and where they are now, and still, only recently wrestled with what it means to be Japanese whiskey. And I think that's an example where the style and the quality reveals itself when you're protecting quality, when you're protecting the thing that you're known for. That's what a GI is there for, right? Like it's not there to inform your whiskey making; it's there to defend your whiskey making. And when you've got such a short time horizon on new world whiskey making with new techniques, new ideas, why stem that creativity? Now I get that. I've seen the same conversation back in New Zealand. I've seen it in the Nordics, and back home, people are like, oh, but there's other people who are passing off whiskey that's just not good enough quality. I'm like, trust the customer. They will find that out. They will look at that and they'll go, that's not good enough. I'm not buying it. It's not a thing. And just keep stepping through your whiskey making path. What are we talking in Scotland, Pete? Like two centuries, even longer of whiskey making. The whiskey making back then is not the whiskey making it is now. We've had some really good interactions with the Scotch Whisky Association. Pete touched on it before, where we're really good friends with the director of legal over there, and every now and again Alan will get a question from us, and we were paying so much money to transporters, and we're just like, listen, could we just please blend this in Scotland? We've got world whiskey stamped all over it. And he said, Nick, if you want to get that through, you have to take that to Parliament. It's like, okay, and you have a chat about it, and you have a chat about the reason why SWA exists, and they're there to defend the quality. Right. And Scotch earn that quality. So I'm not saying that the new wave and new world whiskey makers are making sub-sound whiskeys. Not at all, but it's just still so early in that timeline where, how much more is there to explore and grow into? So
I think we've always said as Woven, we want to discover what whiskey can be.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we want for for all distilleries to be able to do as well, is to discover what their whiskey can be. Now, what I found, this is just anecdotal and sort of is in line with what Nick's saying, but when we went up to the Nordics for Friends in the North, right, we were talking about that a little bit earlier. My preconception was that there was going to be a red thread that ran between these Nordic distilleries because they're from the same geographical area at a large scale, and therefore would be creating a profile, a flavor profile that I was able to run a red thread through. And what I was so pleasantly surprised by, like genuinely ecstatic about, was that there wasn't any commonality between how they're making their whiskies. But they're building their own criteria of what their whiskey is, and then keeping within it and pushing the boundaries of what they've set out to do. And if you think about them creating their own brackets and then working within it and then trying to push it as far as it will go, that creates their own tension within their microcosm of one distillery, which is a really, really exciting thing, because they're able to say, I am Fedi Ocean Distillery, or I'm Agatator, or I am High Coast, or I'm Kura, or Stoning, or whoever it is, pick any distillery around the world. And they're able to push what their whiskey is. And I think that's really, really exciting and almost a beautiful sort of thing to do. And I think that I've got no skin in the game, right, in terms of GIs and stuff. I don't know enough about them to be able to really comment confidently on them. But I would say that I want there to be those differentials between what distilleries are doing to be able to create, to be able to ask the question, what can whiskey be?
Yeah. And just to build on Pete, I think there's two GIs which have come through in the last 10 years, which are really important. Japanese whiskey, first and foremost, they had to stand up and say, actually, that we have to defend the quality of our whiskey makers, because it was being undercut by non-whiskey being used and passed off as Japanese, and just destroying the credibility of that category. That was really important. And I think that's where the debates in Scotch have come from over the years. What is Scotch? Was a huge debate 100 years ago. Grain versus malt, and what you could use and what you couldn't use, and those things should be debated when you stand for something, a quality, right? And I think that's where New World, exactly what Pete's saying. There's so much differential between all of the different creative mindsets in these spaces right now. Just let them go, let them run, explore, and grow, and then see what happens. The other one I think is massively important is over in your neck of the woods, right? American whiskey makers at single malt being able to say, hey, this is malt whiskey. But that's also come from a different place, right? It's come from a place of not being able to say the thing is what it is because of the heritage within your own whiskey making traditions. None of those are designed to they don't constrain creativity, right? Like they enable and they foster the quality of the thing which is already there, and that's in my mind what a GI is there to do.
I'm unfortunately blanking on one of my most recent guests. I can't remember if it was Justin over at ASW, but they're talking about how I'll have to look up who this is, and I'll see if I can insert it. But they were saying that for them, the category or the boundary is actually really helpful in the creativity. Like looking at a blank space or a blank slate can be really difficult to create something out of nothing. But if you have a couple of boundaries in place, like it has to, for UK or Scotland, it's got to be 3 years old. It's got to be all this or that. Then the constraint then become freeing, because then you have something to work off of, rather than just trying to throw everything at a wall and seeing what sticks. I'm sorry, I can't remember who that is at the moment, but that's what I was thinking too, is that there's a for me, that's where kind of that line is give something, but not so much that you're dictating what every distillery has to do.
Yeah, and we do have those boundaries in place as whiskey makers, right? You cannot bring whiskey into the EU without meeting EU regulations for what a whiskey is, and it's the same with the UK and the same with the US. But being so prescriptive on what differentiates a Danish whiskey or a Finnish whiskey or a New Zealand whiskey or an Australian whiskey at this early stage, I think those boundaries that we have in place at a national and governance body level already start to give you a place to work within. So, yeah, I mean, and then for us as people who go out there and try and find some of the craziest stuff on the planet to go and play with, we actively foster that, like, go make some cool stuff. Whereas in Helsinki or in February at the Nordic Distillers Conference, and the stuff that the crew are making at Helsinki Distilling Company is just off the charts, right? And I'm like, what are you guys doing here? And they start talking through what they're working with on their mash bill and their fermentation times, and you're like, oh wow, that's awesome. These flavors are incredible. This is like biting into a hunk of fruity Finnish rye bread, great texture. How much is it per liter, please? Because we can bring some home.
I immediately just thought of Eimwerk over in Reykjavik. I'm wondering, wonder if you guys could work with some of the Floki sheep dung whiskey. And because honestly, I liked it. It's not
good.
what you normally think of, but it's definitely a different flavor for people to get used to.
He talks about walking by the sea with the maritime notes of his forest. I smell Eimwerk. I'm like, gumboots on, just jumped off the 4x4 at the milking shed. That back home, that really agricultural. That's bring more of that. Yeah.
And a flavor like that, which is relatively obscure, funky, farmy, kind of that it's kind of taking it into that point in a direction. With blending, we're able to use that as a tool and then be able to balance it out. Sorry, I'm not getting choked up, I promise. We're able to balance it out and complement it, and then accentuate one bit of it and not the rest. That we're able to augment in a way that I believe will make that flavor more. It could make it more accessible to other people, or could introduce people to that flavor to then discover it in its purest sense. And I love that sort of gateway ability that the Woven's been able to do with some distilleries, where they've gone, I didn't know that flavor, but it's coming from this, and therefore I like that, and I'll try that, and I'll then get involved with them, and blah blah blah. And so more of that, please. More weird stuff, the better, because I like working with it. It's fun, and we love being able to sort of bring it out to more people. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Probably not something that I've necessarily thought in depth about. So here goes. I think for us, we have an awful lot of ambition, right? I think that's pretty clear to see that we want to be able to build our business into something that many people around the world know, enjoy, trust, but trust not just for one flavor, but be able to discover whiskey through Woven and go on a sort of a journey through different flavors, but also different techniques and different combinations, and then be able to use those whiskies to jump into other brands and be able to sort of come through Woven and go back into it when they want to. And for us, that comes down to, blending is this kind of these 4 steps, and the first step is being able to speak to these distilleries and select casks from them. And we've touched on it before about experimentalism within the distillation of whiskies, and being able to select casks from those guys and then combine them on a desk, and then be able to bring in new processes at sort of our large scale blending, and then be able to package it and create a brand that speaks to these people, are all aspects of creativity that I hope will continue to keep people on their toes. Yeah, the next 15 years, I suppose it would be, is really to try and keep pushing those buttons and keep pushing that objective, which is, if somebody else it's not even if somebody else is doing it, we shouldn't do it, but it's how can we do what we do in a woven way that feels right to us and has our signature on it. And I think a good example of that is probably WXC, which is our spirit drink made with coffee. We had no intention of going into the flavored whiskey game, right? That is not something that we saw ourselves doing at any point, but we were drawn into this fascinating world of sort of specialist third wave coffee, and discovered that there was a shared language and technique and flavor profile with coffee that we kind of didn't know about in terms of whiskey. And then, a relatively chance encounter with Claire Wallace, who's the coffee roaster and head of quality at Assembly Roast in London, and her relationship in part with the Cata estate in Colombia, meant that we were able to kind of draw this line from a single estate through to London to Claire, who's roasting coffee specifically in line with what we want, which is high potassium, high sort of guava, banana sort of notes in the coffee without it being sour or berry, and then be able to make a cold brew and then blend around that profile a Scotch whiskey, which we cut with the cold brew coffee to create, no sugar, high strength, really beautiful spirit drink, meant that we were able to turn into flavored whiskey in a way that nobody's done before, right? But using something like coffee and whiskey, which is a relatively tried and tested flavor combination. I mean, Irish coffees, right? But being able to do it with a new lens was really important, and that's something that we try and do as often as possible, and something that I hope in the next 20 years or 15 years we're able to repeat and bring people on that journey, right?
I always come back to our starting point, which is the bars, right? You go back to that, put ourselves into a little time capsule and go back to late 2000s to Edinburgh, where there was this brilliant cocktail scene, and that whatever happened within that community of bartenders, there was a really special energy back then. And when I reflect on it, whiskey was never really part of that space. And I feel, for the work that we do as makers, and we keep trying to add our bit to the story and add to the knowledge, I feel part of that adding is bringing whiskey to the on-trade, back to our roots, have it loved and adored and respected and used right? Like we've been talking lately, we've been working quite hard on highballs the last couple of years, and trying to develop this mindset where we don't sell bottles, we sell glasses being served over a bar, right? And that's a new way that we're trying to think about of Woven and what Woven really should be doing. And if in 10 years' time, if I was looking back at the journey and we were able to do, something special like Fortaleza or like Mictors or like these brands, which regularly get called out by bartenders as things that they makers they respect and they love to use, then we've done our job. All the work that we've done and going out and finding new flavor and packaging it up and Pete using his magic to turn it into something which is delicious, that then unlocks creativity and service and connection in a way beyond just serving a dram, then that would be a really special place for us to be.
Yeah, what Nick said. But
Thank Yeah, and look, just thank you for such considered questions. I don't think either, but it's like someone has been listening to the stuff that we're saying on other podcasts. But it's been really, personally, really, really lovely to speak to you and answer your questions, mate. Thank you.
yeah, very much.